Welcome to Mobile Math, math lessons on the go. Today's learning goal: by the end of this lesson, I should be able to divide positive and negative numbers together without the use of a calculator. So our major big ideas we discovered in multiplication: a positive times a positive gave us a positive result. A positive times a negative in either order gave us a negative result. And then the real tricky one was a negative times a negative gave us a positive result. So if those are a little rusty, you may wish to pause the video here and study some of the examples. So if we're going to look at negative 8 divided by 2, we can represent it in the following. So I'm going to look at both case 1 and case 2 here, but case 1 I'm going to focus on because it makes a little bit more sense. So if negative 8 was divided into two equal groups, how many chips, counters, squares, etc. would be in each group? Well, you can see on the left side I have negative 8 squares. I've shaded them red. If I split those up into two equal groups, it will be two equal groups of negative 4 each. So the answer to negative 8 divided by 2, so a negative 8 divided by a positive 2, the answer is a negative 4. Now I've crossed out case 2 here. How many groups of 2 are there in a group of negative 8? And we're going to explore that more in depth on the next slide. So case 2, how many groups of 2 can I subtract from a negative 8? So I've changed the wording just a little bit, but all still falls within the case 2 approach. So let's take a look. So if I subtract 2, now this looks a little different, because if I have negative 8 and I subtract 2 from it, I actually get a negative 10. Well, if I subtract 2 again, I get a negative 12 as an answer. So instead of moving towards a 0 or a 0 remainder, I'm actually making the problem larger. So what we find for group subtraction is that maybe our strategies don't always work, and it's important to have alternate strategies. The combination of subtracting and negative values is going to disrupt this particular technique. So as we're going to see, we're going to have multiple ways to solve these, and hopefully one of them will click. So we can still use an area model. If we go back to our area model for multiplication, we talked about a dimension times a dimension gives me the area. So the two outside parts, when we multiply them together, give me the inside of the rectangle. So if we take that concept and we look at our division problem, and we look at the negative 8 as being the area, so I have my negative 8 squares here, and then one of my dimensions is a positive 2, I have to work backwards and figure out, well, what else do I have to multiply positive 2 by so that I get a negative 8? Well, right away we could see it's a 4, and I could just count columns to see that. But to make it a negative, I have to use some of those multiplication big ideas, and I have to multiply a positive 2 and a negative 4 together to get this negative 8 inside the red rectangle. So negative 8 divided by positive 2, the answer is negative 4. So in the previous example, we did a negative divided by a positive. Now, what if we look at a negative divided by a negative? So in this case, negative 8 divided by negative 2 can be represented by the following. So you'll notice in this case, I've actually scratched out case 1. And if you want to try and read that, if negative 8 was divided into two equal negative groups, how many chips, counters, squares, etc. would be in each group? That's a pretty tricky way of thinking about the problem. So I'm going to move on to case 2 because I think it makes more sense. How many groups of negative 2 are there in a group of negative 8? Oh, okay, I like that. So if I take my negative 8 squares on the left and I break them up into little groups of negative 2 squares, so each one of these is negative 2, I can see that there are 4 groups. So negative 8 divided by negative 2 equals positive 4. I like that method. If we try our group subtraction method again, we'll see if it works here. It didn't in the last one, but maybe it will here. So if I'm going to subtract a negative 2, now I have to be careful here because I am subtracting a negative, and if we go back to our addition of and subtraction of positive and negative values, this is the same as adding a 2. So if I have negative 8 plus 2, I actually end up with negative 6. If I repeat that several times, and I'll try and write it out as fast as I can here, you'll notice that my numbers are moving towards 0, which means I'm going to have no remainder, which means I can have a nice clean quotient answer. So if I count up, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 times I subtracted. So we had -8 divided by -2, and we still got a +4. So just like the case 1 picture here, we have a +4. If we do group subtraction, it actually works, and we get a +4. If we look at our area model, let's just do this really quick. So I have -8 squares inside my red rectangle here. I can see really quickly I need a 4 on the outside dimension to multiply together. And a +4 times a -2, a positive times a negative, should give me a negative result. So, hey, I've got 3 methods that work for that one. So that's a nice question to try and solve. And that brings us to our summary. So when we looked at big ideas for multiplication, we had positive times a positive was a positive. If we had positive times a negative, we got a negative, and a negative times a negative gave us a positive. So again, pause here if those are a little rusty. If we look at our division cases, a positive divided by a positive still gives me a positive. That's the one we're most familiar with. A positive divided by a negative, or a negative divided by a positive, either one, will give me a negative result. And lastly, a negative divided by a negative still gives me a positive. We talked about the number of negative signs in a multiplication or division problem now. So if we have an odd number of negative signs in a problem, we're going to have a negative answer. So odd is 1, 3, 5, etc. If we have an even number of negative signs in a multiplication or division problem, that's going to lead to a positive answer. So even is 2, 4, 6, etc. So here's the simplified approach for multiplying and dividing positive and negative numbers. Firstly, just count the number of negative signs. Decide on the sign of your final answer. So if it's an odd number of negative signs, it's a negative answer. If it's an even number, it's a positive number. Make that decision before you even start. Secondly, perform the multiplication and or division as if all terms are positive. So just treat them all if they're positive, do the regular multiplying, dividing, and then your third and final step, write your final answer with the correct sign you chose from part 1. It's that simple. So let's take a look. I've got 2 questions here. So I have -60 divided by 15. So right away, if I count up negative signs, I see I only have 1. So I know my answer is negative right away. If I perform my division, and I may do this with group subtraction or any of the different models we've looked at over the last few videos, so I could see that I'm going to subtract 30, subtract another 30, and that leaves me with a total of 4 15s fit inside 60. So if I combine that 4 and the negative sign I decided on in step 1, I know my answer is -4. If I come over to -45 divided by -9, if I count my negative signs right away, I see I have 2 negative signs. So my answer should be positive because that's an even number of negative signs. If I perform the division, how many 9s fit inside 45? I'm pretty comfortable with that one already, so I know that's 5. And then I combine my answer and my sign, and I have the problem solved. Okay, so if you could please press pause on the video and try the following. Find the quotient for the following, so watch your signs. So please press pause now. Okay, welcome back. So let's have a quick look. So -21 divided by -7. If I count up my negative signs, I have an even number. I have 2 of them, so I know my answer will be positive. And how many 7s fit inside 21? 3 of them. So my first answer is positive 3. Next question, 39 divided by -13. So if I count my negative signs, I only have 1 of them, so I know my answer is going to be negative. How many 13s fit inside 39? I know my answer for that is 3, so the answer here for B is -3. And lastly, -42 divided by -6. So I have 2 negative signs, that's an even number. So my answer should be positive. And then how many 6s fit inside a 42? Well, I happen to know that 7 of them fit inside, so the final answer there is positive 7. So thank you for watching. Please watch again and pause where you may have had difficulties, and good luck in your future math problems.